Has Stephen Ross, the Dolphins owner, already made up his mind on who the next general manager of the Miami Dolphins is going to be? I'm Nic Rohloff. This is Dolphins Today by Chat Sports. There's a lot of different reasons why I'm making this video, but let's start at the beginning. When just earlier this week, the Miami Dolphins made some changes inside their front office, parting ways with co-directors of player personnel, Adam Engroff and Anthony Hunt. This obviously just comes a week and a half after Miami parted ways with general manager Chris Grier, who has been with the organization since 2000 and was the GM since 2016. But the reason why these parting of ways, if you will, is so fascinating is because they have been with Miami for 20 plus years, and after Chris Grier was canned, Engroff and Hunt were the two longest tenured employees in this Dolphins front office. Engroff was here starting in 1999, and Hunt was here in 1994. So obviously, Ross or whoever's making decisions, which could also be Brandon Shore and some of these other higher up people in the organization that isn't part of the front office, but more or less part of ownership, clearly felt like they needed to clear out all of the thinking and like schematic ideas, if you will, that was associated with Chris Grier over the last 20 plus years. And Benjamin Allbright, an NFL insider who's more locked in with the Broncos than anything, but does have sources across the league, quote tweeted that tweet of the note from Pelissero, saying that the two specific firings in the heat of scouting season tells me the Dolphins have made a decision on general manager. I'll come out here and say right now, I find it very far-fetched that Miami has already decided who their next GM is going to be. How would they have already determined that? There's no way they would feel confident with hiring Champ Kelly to move from interim GM to full-time GM based off the what? Month he's been interim GM at this point? Not even, like 2 weeks. He only got hired by the Miami Dolphins back in the spring. How could you feel that confident about someone in your building? And I also find it super far-fetched and hard to believe that Miami would have already made a decision on who they want to hire a GM with someone outside the building because you haven't interviewed him now. I just feel like Allbright is a little off here, which has been the case at times as well. We got more to discuss, but join the channel. We're 68 subscribers away from 77.5 thousand. Trying to get to 78K. Let's get to 77.5K today. Join the channel for daily content. I mean, let's be honest here. If the Dolphins did actually already decide on who the next GM is going to be, like Benjamin Allbright suggested, that means it would be interim GM Champ Kelly. Because how are you going to decide on who you're going to bring in before you interview people in January? So it would have to be a promotion from within, and I don't know who else it would be outside of Champ Kelly, because it's like, well, if you're going to promote someone else, like a director of player personnel, well, why wouldn't you have just made them interim GM to begin with? So it would be Champ, and I think that's a bad idea. And this is no shade on Champ Kelly. I just don't think he should be the full-time GM for the Miami Dolphins. I don't like what he really did at the trade deadline. I know trading Jalen Phillips was a popular move, and I thought it was a good decision, but I would have tried to move on from Minkah Fitzpatrick or a Rasul Douglas because, yeah, the Dolphins got to win the week after, but I just don't envision Miami being able to get anything back for them that is good value in the offseason, and or some of them are pending free agents. So I don't think keeping Champ Kelly is the best decision. But there are 6 GM candidates that I want to talk about on today's show. We've had 2 separate shows outlining some GM candidates. And here in mid-November, I wanted to do a little bit of an update on how I rank potential options for Miami this offseason. The number 1 GM target / candidate that I have is Ed Dods, who currently is the assistant GM for the Indianapolis Colts. I have been very fond of Dods. He has been someone in the GM candidate space for the last, decade, it feels like. He started his career with the Raiders as an intern in 2003. He worked his way up throughout multiple organizations, was with the Seattle Seahawks for nearly a decade, and then became the assistant GM for the Colts starting in 2018. And I just like the way Dods, I think, would operate. I mean, the Indianapolis Colts prioritize the trenches, and you have to imagine Ed Dods carries that same viewpoint and belief in the way he would construct his roster as a GM himself. You invest in your offensive line. You invest in your defensive line. The Colts have consistently had a top half O-line and D-line since he's been there in Indy with him and Ballard, the current GM. And I think he would bring that mentality to Miami, and it's certainly a mentality that Miami needs, as they have had one of the worst offensive lines, defensive line combinations, if you will, for the last 5 years plus. Number 2 on my list is the current assistant GM for the Los Angeles Chargers, that being Chad Alexander. I really like the rising figure that Chad Alexander ultimately is. He spent 5 years as the Jets' director of player personnel, was a longtime scout with the Baltimore Ravens, and if you just search up Chad Alexander and read up about him, the belief across the league and really just media space on his ability and to rise to the top and be one of these top candidates, it really has come out of nowhere. Like, Chargers people believe he is going to be a GM this cycle. They are already preparing for him to leave, and they're preparing to find a new assistant GM. Alexander has been a large part in that kind of Renaissance Chargers roster that they put together over the last 5 years since they drafted Herbert in 2020. I think Alexander would be a really good option for the Miami Dolphins. We got more candidates to discuss here, but pick someone. Who do you want to be the next GM of the Miami Dolphins? Get down in the comment section and let me know your thoughts. Coming in at number 3 on my list is Alec Halaby, the current assistant GM for the Philadelphia Eagles. This is a guy that wasn't initially on my list, but after reading up more about him, reading an Athletic article that we talked about last week, he came in at my list at number 3. And I wanted to share this little quote from Jordan Rodriguez of The Athletic on Halaby, saying the longtime right hand of general manager Howie Roseman, a Harvard graduate, Halaby worked his way up from an entry-level role in football operations with the Eagles in 2007 to leading multiple areas within the organization, including talent identification, player evaluation, roster and resources management, and overall organizational strategy. Halaby was a finalist for the Jets GM vacancy last offseason. This is a person who is valued across the league, a rising young front office member, only 39. And I mentioned, and that article mentioned, he's been with the Eagles since 2007, started as a video intern, was promoted to assistant GM in 2022. And not only was he someone who interviewed for the Jets GM position in 2025, he also interviewed with the Carolina Panthers and Washington Commanders for their GM position in 2024 before Washington and Carolina ultimately went with different candidates. Halaby is a very intriguing guy because coming from the pipeline that is Howie Roseman, you'd have to project positive things because Roseman is the far and away thought of best executive in the entire NFL. I'm not saying Halaby would be able to be Howie Roseman light, but you imagine, and I said this with at Dods a little bit earlier, the principles and beliefs of how you build an NFL roster and how you operate in the draft and in free agency and on the trade market would be similar. And that is something Miami would desperately need. Number 4 on my list is Josh Williams, the current director of scouting for the San Francisco 49ers, another candidate that we've talked about quite a bit here. He started with the 49ers in 2011 as an assistant in the scouting department, and this is his first year as director of the scouting and football operations. In the quote-unquote job explanation of what he does is that he directs pro and college scouting efforts and assists in contract negotiations as well, which is obviously a large part of this job as well. It's not just drafting, it's not just making trades, it's also negotiating potential contract extensions, signings in free agency. And Williams is a rising candidate who was actually a finalist for the Jags GM spot just a year ago before they ultimately went with the young Gladstone. Now, it's interesting with Williams in that Jags interview process is that the Jacksonville Jaguars made it so public. I've never seen them do it. They announced that they were going to interview Josh Williams. They announced they were interviewing Josh Williams, and then they announced on the same day when the interview was completed. Very weird publication of Josh Williams' interview in Jacksonville, but certainly a guy that other organizations thought of as a potential option. A couple more guys to get to here, but the month of November is coming to a close sooner rather than later, but don't miss out on getting your 2025 Dolphin Salute to Service gear. Shout out to the troops. Chatsports.com/Dolphin Salute is the link that's in the description and comments of today's video. You can get hats, you can get hoodies, you can get shirts. It's a perfect gift for yourself. It's also a perfect gift for the holiday season approaching in December. Crazy. We're only about, 6 weeks away from Christmas? Crazy. Number 5 on my list is assistant GM for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Mike Greenberg. No, it's not Greeny you see on ESPN. Same name, different person. But I really like Greenberg. Jordan Rodriguez of The Athletic on Mike Greenberg said that he's been here in Tampa since 2010. Assisted Bucs GM Jason Light on all things during the multiple team building pivots, including a Super Bowl roster built around Tom Brady and a continual postseason contender built around Baker Mayfield. Greenberg interviewed for the Jets GM job in January. And I think that part that Rodriguez mentioned about the different eras of Buccaneers football since he's been there. Think about it. They had the number 1 overall pick and drafted Jameis Winston. Winston obviously didn't pan out what most people thought he was going to do in the NFL, and it really never resulted in any wins for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and it was a disappointment. But then you bring in Tom Brady, and you get a Super Bowl immediately because you built a really good set of weapons, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans. You were able to have an elite defensive line and pass rush with Shaq Barrett at times and some of these other studs that helped dominate the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. But then you get Brady to retire after making a couple more playoffs. You bring in Baker Mayfield, and you've been the top of the NFC South consistently over the last 3 years. That all speaks to the organizational competency that they are consistently making the right decisions. Drafting best player available, whether it's Emeka Egbuka, Kalijah Kancey, Vita Vea. They've had a really good track record in Tampa Bay of building a sound football team from top to bottom that is well balanced, and then you get the quarterback play to elevate it in the postseason status. Last candidate that I wanted to talk about today is John McKay. He comes in at number 6 on my list. He is the current assistant GM for the Los Angeles Rams. This is a really young candidate, only joining the Rams in 2016 as a scouting assistant, but he has quickly risen up the ranks inside that organization, and this is actually his first year as assistant GM for the Rams. He did serve as the director of pro personnel from 2021 to 2024, so he does have experience in terms of managing other people inside an organization and overseeing a massive role inside a football team. Now, I do think it might be a little early for John McKay. I think you could tell in that photo he's a little bit green, a little young. But so is Alec Halaby, so who really cares about youth? If the guy is good at their job and a rising candidate, might as well get him now while you're searching for a GM rather than miss out on him because you thought he was too young now. You wait, you hire someone else. They stink. You're hiring someone 4 years from now. Oh, but McKay already got hired and is a star because he got hired the year or 2 years after you passed on him by a different organization. So the young and the youth isn't really something that turns me away per se, but I do think there might be better options out there at the current moment, and that's why he comes in at number 6 on my list. Like I said on this top of the show, we will not probably see the Dolphins officially announce a GM until late January, and I don't think Benjamin Allbright is accurate with his notion that they have already decided on where they're going with GM. But we will have you updated on all things Miami Dolphins between news, GM search, head coach rumors on the channel, so subscribe today.